too soon. I came up too soon. I was too excited. I didn't wait for the music to play. All right. Next, we have Naomi Brockwell with Ludlow Institute, and she's going to bring up quite a few people and have a great conversation. She's going to help them all introduce themselves. So welcome on up, Naomi.
Thank you. We've got quite a group here, and we're going to be talking all things privacy. So it might be helpful for us to go through and just introduce ourselves and maybe say a line about what you do. We'll just do like rapid fire and then we can get into the questions. Wade, did you want to start? We've got Wade Dye here.
Yeah, I'm a research partner at 1KX. I've been designing, implementing, and investing in privacy protocols. And excited to chat about privacy with everyone here.
Cool. We've got Ilia Volokh.
I do product at Threadbare. Yeah, I do product at Threadbare, and I like geometry.
And we got Bobbin Threadbare from Maiden.
Yes, so I'm one of the co-founders of Maiden. I've been working on privacy for a very long time, even before Maiden. And yeah, Maiden is a privacy L2.
Wonderful. So we're going to be talking about privacy. First of all, I would love you guys to define what you actually mean by privacy, because it could mean application privacy. It could mean privacy in transactions. It could mean all kinds of things. So to set the stage of where you guys are all coming from, did you want to start just like what are you mainly focused on when you're talking about privacy?
Yeah, I think when I think about privacy, and there are, as you said, many aspects, but for me, the main one is like the protocol level privacy, where you can't, and it has several properties. So like the first one is that you can't figure out who is transacting with whom. The second one, you don't know what exactly is being transacted, like how much am I transferring. And the third level is like, at the smart contract level, you don't know necessarily what code is being executed. So like you have like functional privacy as well. So those are the primary things, and then those are enforced at protocol level. There are other things at the network level where are you interacting with a network through a privacy preserving layer and not things like that. I think those are important too, but for me, primary privacy is the privacy at the protocol layer.
Okay. Yeah.
Copy paste.
Copy paste, great.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go a little bit more broad first to comment on actually, since we're talking about privacy, let's define the different categories, right? So I think we have like communication privacy for messages, right? And then we'll have like data privacy. That's, you click like the consent thing. Those are important, but that's, not what we're talking about here. And even at the protocol level, right? When we talk about like on-chain privacy, there's also privacy leakage when you connect, for example, to your RPC provider, right? That connection is typically not discussed when we talk about like on-chain privacy. And so I would say the most, the bottleneck with the gap that we have is there's a block explorer that's public that anyone can access, right? And that's really top of mind. That's the thing we want to fix. There's a lot of other issues, right? Like how can we make sure the RPC queries are also private? But I would say that's not really in scope when we talk about on-chain privacy.
I think that's great, and I think it's really good to contextualize that, because I find that people miss the fact that privacy is not in a vacuum. Like, you can have the most private protocol in the world. If you don't know how to use the internet privately, then it doesn't mean a thing. You've got, like, even in wallets, like the application layer, quite often you're just pinging some API to get a currency conversion, and people don't understand that that's a privacy leakage. Is that a honeypot that's actually giving you that currency conversion? Now it's telling, some company exactly what you're converting. So a lot of things to keep in mind when we're talking about privacy. And then it's like the idea of private from whom? Is this just like publicly accessible information? We've started talking about viewing keys now. We're starting to talk about like to what extent should we allow other entities to be able to see inside this? And then there's transparency when it comes to the protocol itself. Some people want to know that like you can actually prove a certain fixed supply of a coin. So there's some transparency element in that. So it's like, it gets to be a pretty complicated discussion. So let's talk about threat models, because that'll help us kind of zone in on which privacy we're most focused on. We've got chain analysts, data brokers, state actors. I would love to hear from each of you about like where you think our focus should be in 2026. What is the barrier to privacy? Who's the main like adversary to privacy?
I mean, I think all of the above, but like there is priority, right? And in my mind, I do worry about like the state level actors as well. Like I think that's important, but the data on blockchain being fully public and fully being like, there forever, and you being able to go back many years and figure out what is, who did what. I think this is like the barrier is becoming lower and lower for regular people to like go and look at it. And by regular people, I don't mean necessarily like just regular people. I mean like criminals. Like they're not sophisticated. I mean unsophisticated actors. And with help of AI, for example, this barrier will keep coming down, right? So in my mind, like we need to get to the point where it is difficult for like a regular person with help of AI to like make sense of what is happening. Now this is like almost table stakes. Now we can go to like, okay, now I have like a sophisticated actor that can invest like millions of dollars and like do this, and that is like also important, but like, let's at least get to a point where like a regular person with internet access and like an LLM model cannot go and analyze the chain and like figure out your personal transaction history up to like 10 years or 20 years back.
I just want to kind of zone in there because it's like it's 2026 and we're still talking about just getting that sorted. I feel like crypto has been around for a really long time now, and the understanding that permanence on a blockchain is going to be good for AI to process. It's only just starting to get into people's awareness.
I think there's like maybe there was some education gap at some point because people did think, and a lot of people still think that blockchains are private, right? They assume anonymity, and like therefore, like you don't know who you're transacting with, and it hasn't been true for almost ever. Like even from the very beginning, it's just up until fairly recently, it was relatively expensive to correlate data with off-chain identities and all of that stuff. You had to have sophisticated firms like Chain Analysis and others to do this kind of analysis, and it cost money. So like we won't do it on a regular person. But now again, with the advent of AI, cost will come down, and what was previously costing a lot of money will be very cheap. Now, you do get to a point where like there are state-level actors who can like invest millions and billions of dollars. But I think, and that's important to protect against those too. But I think let's first solve the first problems and then like get after the state-level actors later.
Yeah, Ilias, what are your thoughts?
For the most part, I agree. I think the main objective from a product perspective is just to impede people from learning about each other's financial activity. So for starters, nobody should know how many digital potatoes other people have. And then the next step after that, in my mind, is to facilitate something like private markets. So it's related to the idea that people are not able to know what code is being executed, only that it's being executed correctly. So matchmaking in a private way, and not leaking what positions are being entered and by who.
Yeah, I think the question on threat models, right, it's one that's really fundamental, but really, I would frame it in a slightly different way, right? What is the threat of crypto not getting adoption? Like, what are we all doing here with our ETH conference? How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you think Ethereum is at web scale adoption? We all want is transactions at TPS all-time high in terms of actual throughput, but blockchain demand, like in terms of blockchain demand, we're actually at a pretty low point in history, at least on Ethereum L1. I think the threat is that we don't get to web-scale adoption, and that's the North Star. That's what we want to get to, right? We can argue about the details. We can argue about what's the ideology, like how can we best build the cypherpunk like protocol, right? But at the end of the day, we need to get this to people to use, and that's what we're trying to build. And if we want to get there, there's a necessary couple of different steps we need to take. It's clear that if we just do the cypherpunk approach, Trinity Cash, Zcash, that failed. We didn't get there. Now let's try again. Let's learn from that lesson, and let's see how can we actually build for adoption.
Well, differentiate between Tornado Cash, a sanctioned protocol, and Zcash, which has like seen a giant increase in like the past few months. But
this is a great question, and I think we're slowly getting into consensus on a type of privacy protocol that differentiates and that can reach wide-scale adoption. And I called it threat-resistant protocols, and Bobbin actually had a better framing of it, which I will use now. It's called evasion-resistant, and the rough idea is actually, okay, let's look at what's wrong, with a Tornado Cash or Zcash like protocol. What happens is that if the Bybit hack happens, recall the Bybit hack last year, right, $1.5 billion of value hacked. If that goes into a privacy protocol, all of a sudden we cannot distinguish a normal, users' money from the hackers' money. And that was really the problem, the key problem with directly implementing the maximal level of privacy, right, on chain without any type of controls. And it turns out if you just try to fix that one problem, it becomes more or less you'll have a system that can adapt to many, many different situations. And what I mean by this is, okay, we need to trace hacks into our protocol. And that means we'll have to maybe get some form of viewing key, right? And we'll have to decide who gets to see this viewing key. And therefore, if we have the viewing key, then the attacker, the hacker is not able to evade the tracing of that transaction, right? And I think Bobbin can explain more on, evasion resistance, but that's what I think is required, is we need to build threat-resistant and evasion-resistant protocols and get them to wide-scale adoption.
And is your reasoning for threat-resistant, I'm just trying to understand, why you want that? Is it because you don't think enough people are going to create the network's effects to make a protocol sustainable if they think that scammers are using it? Or do you think that governments won't allow these things to exist unless there's the layer of compliance? Why?
Yeah, really good question. I think on all sides, right? I think all of those are actually valid points for why we need threat resistance. So on the compliance side, if we want enterprises, institutions to come on chain, they need to distinguish, right? It's similar with exchanges, right? You change off-ramps need to distinguish a normal, honest user and, hacked funds.
So it's a compliance issue. You think it's like a
compliance
government?
applies, but also I think, to myself, speaking for myself, I think I think a lot of people are like me. I also think that, look, I'm a normal user. I should have a privacy, but maybe this should apply to the the North hacker, right? And how do we exactly draw that line? It's hard. As a builder, if you build completely permissionless protocols, there's basically no way to distinguish that, right? And so I think ethically speaking, anyway, this is a whole other discussion. I think assets are more like action, they can incur real world consequences when you give out assets as a reward for action. But communication, right, it's more like similar to freedom of speech. Anyways, that's my opinion. So
you wouldn't consider freedom to transact as freedom of speech?
But I think maybe Bobbin can mention more on the...
Well, I'd love to know if you guys agree. Do you think that we need visibility, we need compromise, government compliance in order for crypto to succeed?
So there are two aspects to it, which I would like to say. There's a practical aspect to it, and then there's the ethical aspect to it. So the practical aspect, why did U.S. government go after Tornado Cash and not after Zcash? And one of the obvious things is that North Koreans didn't try to launder a lot of money through Zcash, and they did try to launder a lot of money through Tornado Cash. And so the question is can we have a protocol where most of the usage is being done for regular people, that's most of the usage is not nefarious, and what is the threshold after which the US government or any government will actually go after a protocol if they say, okay, half of the usage here is for money laundering and therefore we'll go after it. And I think one of the things here to look at is the traditional financial system, because traditional financial system launders a ton of money through it, and opinions vary, but between 2 and 5% of the world GDP is getting laundered through traditional financial system. And so I think the goal as a protocol builder is to build a protocol where not more than 5% of money is used for, or transactions is done for money laundering. It's most of the transactions are nice and done for regular people for legitimate reasons. But if there is a small portion of that that is being done for illegitimate reasons, then maybe that's good enough from the standpoint of regulators, governments, and so on, so not to come after this protocol, because they're seeing the same in the traditional financial system. And that's one of the practical aspects. We want to build a protocol that doesn't get used by 20, 30% of the time for illegal activities.
That's such an interesting question to explore for me. Maybe, Ilias, you haven't thoughts on this, because for me, it all comes down to who defines legitimate activity. So I feel like we're creating a system and we're saying, we're making sure that we can control it to a certain extent so that people doing illegal things can't use it. And I'm wondering, okay, but illegal by China's standards, illegal by North Korea's standards, by America's standards, these are global protocols. Who gets to dictate, and what happens when the regime change and now it's illegal to say things that are bad about the government? Have we created a mechanism of control when now these people are still using it for legitimate, which means just kowtowing to politicians? Do you have thoughts on this, Ilias?
Yes, but no answers. First of all, I think a nice phenomenon in crypto is that builders, they have a substantial say in what might become ethical because they define what is practical. So they sort of narrow the selection space, which is very nice and not a phenomenon that we have in TradFi. My take is a bit extreme. I think it's good to have running water, even if criminals also enjoy running water. And I pretty much think the same about privacy. It's good for people to have privacy. I don't think it's avoidable that good properties are also beholden onto bad people. And I don't necessarily think it's the most important problem to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Can
to
I
answer,
actually...
who defines the rules, right? Like, it can be government-defined rules, in my opinion, especially at the protocol level. I think in here, like, it's important to separate compliance versus evasion resistance. Compliance is something that is defined by a given jurisdiction, and you cannot comply. You can't build a protocol that complies with China, with US, with Europe, with Nigeria, and many other countries at the same time. But at the protocol level, like, the evasion resistance is like a meta concept that is enforced by the protocol. It's like in Ethereum, DAO hack happened, and like people came together, it's a social construct, decided to roll things back. In the extreme situations like this, maybe you can decide, okay, this like Bybit hack happened, and maybe it's good for a set of validators to come together and decrypt the trail of Bybit hacker, but not touching anybody else's privacy. And there are some technical issues with this and how to solve them, but I think that would be the type of like who enforces the rules. The protocol enforces the rules. It's not any specific government that enforces, not because it is. So that was the practical aspect. I think there's the ethical aspect of here as well. Is like it's not good for Bybit hackers to get $1.5 billion, regardless of who they are, whether they're in North Korea, US, or wherever. And the protocol itself can decide that this is a bad thing that had happened. And then, yeah, you have competition between different protocols. But in this case, you could say, yeah, it was clearly a hack, and we clearly don't want it to happen. And like, if let's say 2/3 of the validators agree, they can do that, for example.
And I have 2 points to make. This comes down to the debate of, is a blockchain neutral infrastructure, or is a blockchain a mechanism for social consensus? And I think if you have built one, if you have deployed one, or operated a validator, you understand it's social consensus all the way down, right? Even for Bitcoin, it's people decide, even at the end of the day, like whether they upgrade the protocol. Ethereum still upgrades twice a year. And how do we design the mechanism for the social consensus, right? Currently has been, let's just give this to validators. Validators can decide, and then protocol designers get to design a protocol, and validators get to kind of choose whether they run the fork, right? And I think, yes, this is a very builder-centric way, like builder and operator-centric way of thinking about governance. And I should disagree with that point that I actually would like to challenge that point. Should we really let the community of builders and blockchain operators decide on an infrastructure that is used by everyone, right? While we're the minority of maybe we're not that much of a minority anymore, but there's a lot more other people out there with, I think we'll have the obligation to think through the governance structure and not over-index on builders and operators of chains. And we should include, everyone in the world, and think through, right? This is more than just us. We're building infrastructure that everyone will use.
Yeah, I guess I have a question about why is crypto the exception here? Because you don't see Apple having safeguards in place to make sure criminals don't get their phones, and you don't get shoe manufacturers having safeguards in place to say that criminals don't use shoes. And so you're saying crypto must be fundamentally different, and we should have those safeguards to stop criminals using crypto. But they're using electricity infrastructure, they're using telecommunications infrastructure. There are all of these things that criminals are using in day-to-day life, including water. So I'm just trying to understand why crypto is like a different kind of entity.
Can I elaborate on the point I made previously? Let's think about the different type of privacy and just compare messaging, like end-to-end encryption, to on-chain privacy, privacy for payments, right? And messaging, I think, should be end-to-end encrypted. It's freedom of speech. You should be able to communicate with anyone in the world privately.
Financial privacy, freedom of speech. I get to donate to political causes, and I get to donate to, charities, and I'm kind of exercising my right to have a voice and use
I'll
my
give you an
purchasing
example.
power.
This is a thought experiment. It was in my tweet. You can look it up. But here's the thought experiment. With oracles, you can design a mechanism where, with a privacy protocol, I can give out a bounty of, let's say, the $1.5 billion that hacked from Bybit, right, in Ethereum, so no one can seize it. Where if you can demonstrate a real event happened, and demonstrate that you caused that real event to happen, and connect it to Ethereum address, through Oracle network, I will give you this $1.5 billion. I can encode that on the smart contracts, and that incentivizes that event to happen in the real world. And if you think it through, there's a lot of people that are incentivized to think about ways to make that happen, to claim the $1.5 billion. And that makes assets fundamentally different than speech, I would say.
Interesting. I think like pre-1970, people would not have agreed with you because when the Bank Secrecy Act came into power, like privacy in the financial sphere was like a given right. You have the New York Times saying like, well, the Bank Secrecy Act is unconstitutional. You know, disclosing $10,000 transactions is like egregious. The government shouldn't have the right to that. We have the Fourth Amendment. They should need a warrant. So there is an idea that maybe the Fourth Amendment should apply to everything, including finance, and maybe Bank Secrecy Act should be repealed. And but interesting thought experience. But I love your thoughts, Bobbin.
For me, it's like a difference of a degree. I don't think like your political donations or anything should be ever like public or like visible to anyone. But I do think like there is a difference between like us exchanging, let's say, a few $100s, a few thousands, maybe even $100,000, but from somebody moving $1 billion. Like in my mind, like I would love like for a protocol to exist that works like cash more than anything, where smaller transactions are fully private. But if you try to move $1 billion in cash, that's very difficult. Like from a logistical standpoint, like you need the van, you need movers who will help you load the van, and it like creates a lot of complications. And in the world of like electronic digital assets, moving a single dollar and moving 10 billion is equally as easy. And I don't know if this is the right property. I would love for like regular transactions to be fully private. I don't know if moving like $1 billion or $10 billion should be just equally as private as moving $1.
Interesting. So it might be a matter of scale for you. So we need to wrap up, but I guess the final question I wanted to maybe get a rapid fire response. I see like the adoption issue is definitely an issue that we're facing. I think that one of the barriers to adoption is actually kind of the stigmatization of privacy, that privacy is now something about hiding, it's about like criminal activity. For me, it's just like a fundamental right. Do you see that this cultural shift where we now make people feel shameful for privacy is like something we should be concerned about in the crypto space? Are we focused on this cultural shift so that we can like reestablish privacy as something that's normal? Is this on your radar? I
actually see that, especially in the last year, things have shifted dramatically. Like I used to be in the position where I wasn't able to tweet about privacy because would draw too much attention, and now like it's and like I've been working on privacy for the last 7 years, and like there was a period of time where it was like, no, you shouldn't do this. Like our legal department would say, you shouldn't do this because it draws too much attention to the project and all of that stuff. And now it's very open. Like I'm very happy that you can actually, it's becoming a hot topic and people realize that it's need. I actually do think it's a fundamental need. We, as a blockchain industry, will not succeed without privacy. Like there is no way any of these protocols will work without privacy. And so I'm happy that the opinions are shifting, and I do think there is probably much more to be done to destigmatize privacy, but we're already on a good path toward that.
Yeah, rapid fire responses way.
I think we should say privacy is normal, but also ask more questions on, okay, what is normal? Normal is defined differently in different contexts, and that's food for thought.
Yeah, Elias.
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all your time and the work that you're doing in the privacy space.
Thank you for having us.